Hello. Hello. Okay, let me check. Caption all good. Chapter 11. Yep. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you guys are. Thank you so much for dropping by. Today, I'm not gonna waste too much time going into why I've been missing for like 3 weeks, but life. Life happens, and life sucks. That's all I'm gonna say. Very last minute decision to read today because I really was going to decide to just rest, but you know what? It's okay. We'll read like a couple of chapters. Okay. Um. Hope you guys are alright. The New Year, Happy New Year to everyone. I said that I would finish the book before the New Year. That did not happen, as everything that I've said. So learn your lesson. Don't take my words for anything. I'm horrible at keeping up to my words, but it's okay. You know what? We take one day at a time and be patient. And just try your best at whatever you're doing. Because I know I am. Anyway, without further ado, I don't want to waste too much time doing absolutely nothing, talking about nonsense. Let's start. Today we are continuing Natsume Sōseki, それから and then by Natsume Sōseki. We finished reading 10 chapters. As with all Natsume Sōseki's books, the story is moving in a very, very slow pace. 10 chapters has gone by, but barely anything exciting has happened. But that's like, your typical Natsume Sōseki book. Very, very, very day-to-day, normal life occurrence kind of situation. So we're gonna continue today. Chapter 11. I'm not sure how long I can read. Probably 2 chapters. Depend how I feel. If I feel okay after finishing 2 chapters, we'll read 1 more chapter. Okay, guys? Don't wanna promise too much, because you know me by now. Anyways, thank you for dropping by, everyone. Whoever's in the chat, whoever's in the game, which I don't think there's anyone, but it's okay. Let us read today. Alright, guys. I'm gonna go with this angle today. Chapter 11, それから by Natsume Sōseki. Let me stretch. I just saw that. I wasn't paying attention to my stupid my VC face. I'm sorry. That was embarrassing, but it's okay. Okay, let's go. Okay. Today we are reading それから by Natsume Sōseki, chapter 11. Chapter 11. All of a sudden, People were walking the streets in silk gauze, kimonos. Daisuke, who had spent 2 or 3 days doing research at home without looking any further than his own garden, suddenly felt the heat when he stepped out wearing a winter hat. Just as he was thinking that he too should put away his search, he passed two people in the space of 10 or 12 blocks who were still wearing lined kimonos. On the other hand, there were students gathered in a newly opened ice parlor, glasses in hand, drinking something cold. Daisuke thought of Seitaro. These days, Daisuke had grown fonder than ever of Seitaro. When he talked to other people, he felt as if he were talking to their shells, and he found it terribly irksome. But when he looked at himself, he had to admit that he, of all people, must be irksome to others. When he thought that this was yet another consequence of prolonged exposure to the misfortunes of the struggles for survival, he did not feel very grateful. These days, Seitaro was forever wanting to practice balancing on the ball. This was because Daisuke had taken him to the amusement quarters of Asakusa the other day. His single-mindedness was something he had inherited from Daisuke's sister-in-law. But being his brother's child as well, there was something generous and unpressing about his single-mindedness. It was a pleasure for Daisuke to keep him company, for his soul poured into Daisuke's without any reserve. Daisuke was finding it painful to be surrounded by spirits that refused to shed their armor whether it was night or day. This spring, Seitaro had begun middle school. He seemed to have shot up suddenly. In another year or two his voice would change. There was no way of knowing what path he would take from there, but in order to survive as a human being, he was sure to arrive at the fate of having to incur the dislike of other human beings. When that time came, he would probably clothe himself inconspicuously, so as to not attract attention, and beggar-like linger about the marketplace of men in search of something. Daisuke went out to the moat. Just the other day, mounds of azaleas had stamped a pattern in red and white upon the garden of the other bank, but now there was no trace of them. On the steep slope where the grass grew rampant, pine tree after pine tree stood as far as the eye could see. The sky was beautifully clear. Daisuke thought of taking the streetcar home, teasing his sister-in-law and playing with Seitaro, but he suddenly lost the desire and decided to look at the pines and follow the bank of the moat until he became tired. When he came to Shinmitsuke, the streetcars going to and fro became irritating. So he crossed the moat and cut out from the Shokonsha towards Bancho. There he circled about it. It was suddenly struck him as foolish to wander aimlessly. Normally he believed that only the lowly walk with a purpose, but in this particular instance, he felt that the lowly might be more admirable. He realized that he had been seized with the ennui again and began walking home. In the Kagurazaka, he came upon a shop that had a blaring phonograph out front. The sound was terribly metallic and pierced his head. When he entered his own gate, he encountered Kadono, who, taking advantage of his master's absence, was singing biwa songs at the top of his lungs. When he heard Daisuke's footsteps, he stopped instantly. "Well, that was mighty quick, sensei," he said, coming to the door. Without a word, Daisuke hung up his hat and went from the veranda to the study. There, he deliberately closed the shoji. Kadono, who had followed, teacup in his hand, asked, "Should I leave it closed? Isn't it hot?" Daisuke took a handkerchief from his sleeve and wiped his brow, but still ordered, "Keep it closed." Kadono shut the shoji with a puzzled expression and left. Daisuke sat blankly in the dark room for some 10 minutes. Daisuke had skin that glowed in a way that made others envious and muscles so supple that it would have been hard to find their like in a laborer. He was so blessed with health that since birth he had not experienced what could be called a major illness, since he believed that this was the only way that life was worth living. Health was at least twice as valuable to him as it was to most people. His health was as sound as his body. Of course, he was constantly plagued by his sense of logic. There were also times when the center of his head felt like a longbow target, a series of 2 or 3 concentric rings. Since that morning, he had suffered more than usual from this feeling. At such times, Daisuke would silently ponder to what end he had been born into this world. He had often grappled with this problem and held it before his eyes. Sometimes he was motivated by simple philosophical curiosity. At other times, the social forces surrounding him pressed to imbue his brain with their all too complex hues, or like today, the thoughts came as a result of ennui. Each time, however, he came to the same conclusion. But this conclusion was not solution to the problem. In fact, it amounted to a denial of it. According to his thinking, man was not born for a particular purpose. Quite the opposite. A purpose developed only with the birth of an individual. To objectively fabricate a purpose at the outset and to apply it to a human being was to rob him at birth of freedom of action. Hence, purpose was something that the individual who came into this world had to make for himself. But no one, no matter who, could freely create a purpose. This was because the purpose of one's existence was as good as announced to the universe by the course of that existence itself. Starting from this premise, Daisuke held that one's natural activities constituted one's natural purposes. A man walked because he wanted to. Then, walking became his purpose. He thought because he wanted to. Then, thinking became his purpose. Just as to walk or to think for a particular purpose meant the degradation of walking and thinking, so too establish an external purpose and to act to fulfill it meant the degradation of action. Accordingly, those who used the sum of their actions as a means to end were in effect destroying the purpose of their own existence. Therefore, Daisuke had lived to this day, making it his purpose to actualize whatever fancies and desires entered his mind. It was the same when 2 incompatible desires and fancies battled in his heart. He viewed it merely as the consumption of a purpose that had arisen from the contradiction. What this boiled to was that Daisuke had always conducted himself with so-called purposeless act on his purpose. And he understood that insofar as it deceived no one, it was the most ethical form of conduct. Daisuke, who lived to actualize this principle as much as possible, was at times unwittingly beset by the question he had long ago rejected. He would begin to ask why he was doing what he was doing. This was precisely what had happened as he strolled through the Bancho and wondered why was he strolling. In such instances, Daisuke noticed that the undernourished state of his vitality. A starved act contained neither sufficient courage nor interest to be executed in one blow. That was why he found himself questioning its significance midway. This he labeled ennui. He believed that his bouts of confusion in logic were brought on when he was beset by a case of ennui. For him to stop in the middle of an act to inquire its purpose, putting the cart before the horse, could only be the work of ennui. Inside the closed room, he clapped his head in his hands and tried shaking it once or twice. He could not bear to drag out and ponder once again the meaningless doubt that countless thinkers had repeatedly experienced throughout the ages. When its form flickered before his eyes, he thought not again and shut it out immediately. At the same time, he felt acutely the inadequacy of his vital energies. He did not have enough interest to peacefully execute an act for its own sake. He stood alone in the midst of a wilderness. He was at his wit's end. Daisuke ardently desired the satisfaction of his highly refined life appetites, and in some ways, he also tries to buy the satisfaction of the demands posed by morality. He expected that there would come a point when the two would clash and set off sparks. He therefore maintained his life appetites at low level and tried to rest content. His room was an ordinary Japanese-style room. There was nothing of note in its furnishing. As far as he was concerned, there was not even a single decent frame. All that was beautiful enough to catch the eye of the way of color was concentrated in the Western books arranged in the bookcase. He now sat vacantly amidst those books. It was no small thing that had lured his consciousness into such heavy torpor, he thought, and to rouse it to its full sharpness, he would have to do something about his surroundings. His eyes traveled all around the room. Then, they again stared vacantly at the wall. In the end, he thought that only one thing could save him from this diluted existence, and he said to himself, I must see Michio-san after all. He regretted having set out, walking in the direction where his feet were reluctant to carry him. He was just thinking of leaving again and going to Hiraoka's when Terao came from Morikawa-cho. He was wearing a new straw hat and a modest summer cloak, and complained repeatedly about the heat as he rubbed his red face. What did you come here for now? Daisuke greeted him inhospitably. He had always conducted his relationship with Terao on such terms. Right now is about the best time for visiting you, isn't it? You were taking a nap again, weren't you? People who don't work just get too lazy. I wonder what on earth you were born for, he said, fanning his chest with the straw hat. Since the weather was not yet that hot, his exaggerated gesture was rather amusing. What I was born for is no business of yours. What did you come here for anyway? Is it another case of just for 10 days or so? If it's got anything to do with money, I don't want to hear about it, refused Daisuke bluntly in anticipation. You really don't have any manners, do you? And was the only reply Terao could make. But he showed no sign of being offended. Actually, words like this could never sound rude in Terao's ears. Daisuke watched his face silently. The face made no more impression on him than on a blank wall. Terao pulled out a dirty, roughly stitched together book from his kimono. I have to translate this, he said. Daisuke was still silent. Don't look so lazy just because you don't have to worry about your next meal. Wake up, will you? It's a matter of life and death for me. With these words, he twice slapped the small book against the corner of his chair. By when? Terao rustled the pages back and forth. 2 weeks, he announced firmly. If I don't get this cleared away one way or the other, by then I can't eat. So there's no two ways about it. Such ambition. Daisuke was sarcastic. That's why I came running all the way over here from Hongo. Oh, you don't have to lend me any money. Though it would have been better if you did. But anyway, there are other places I don't understand, so I came to ask your opinion. What a bother. My head doesn't feel right today. I can't sit around doing that. Just go ahead and fudge it. What difference does it make? They're paying you by the page anyway, right? Look, even I can't be that irresponsible. It will mean a lot of trouble if people point out mistranslations. You're such a pain. Daisuke was still being lazy. Look here, said Terao. It's no joke. You've got to do something once in a while. A guy like you who's always been loafing around must get so bored that he doesn't know what to do with himself. Now, if I had wanted to find someone who could really read this stuff, I wouldn't have bothered to come all the way over here. But such people aren't like you. They are all busy. Terao was utterly nonplussed. Daisuke made up his mind that he either had to have a fight or give in. Although he was capable of temperament of being contemptuous of a person like Terao, he was not capable of working himself up to anger. Then keep it as short as possible, he warned, and turned only to the marked pages. He did not even dare to ask for a synopsis of the story, and he could not resolve any ambiguous points in the passages Terao asked about. Eventually Terao said, "Thanks," and turned the book over. "What are you going to do about the places we didn't understand?" asked Daisuke. "Oh, I'll do something. No matter who I ask, there's probably no one who would understand it completely. And anyway, there's no time, so it can't be helped." Terao took it for granted, and his livelihood was far more important concern than any mistranslation. The consultation being over, Terao, as usual, launched into literary topics. A dramatic change took place now, as that he was no longer talking about his own translation, and he became his usual impassioned self. Daisuke thought that among the works bearing the names of leading writers of the day, there must be many that had the same significance for their authors as Terao's translation had for him, and he smiled to himself at this contradiction to Terao. But because it was too much trouble, he did not say anything. Thanks to Terao, Daisuke never got to Hiraoka's that day. At dinner time, a small package arrived from Maruzen. Daisuke put down his chopsticks and opened it to find 2 or 3 books that he had ordered from abroad quite some time ago. He put them under his arms and went to his study. One by one he picked them up, and although it was dark, flipped through 2 or 3 pages, and there was nothing to draw his attention in any of them. He had even forgotten the title of the last book. Thinking he would read them eventually, he left them bundled together and got up to put them on top of the bookcase. When he peered out from the veranda, he discovered a beautiful sky on the verge of losing its brilliant colors. Above the Polonius next door, now conspicuously dark, a pale moon had arisen. Then Kadono came in carrying a large lamp. It had a green shade with vertical markings like crinkled silk. Kadono placed it on the table and went out to the veranda, remarking on his way out, "It's getting to be about the time for fireflies, isn't it?" Daisuke looked puzzled and answered, "They wouldn't be out yet." "Is that right?" Kadono asked, and then immediately continued in serious vein. "Fireflies used to be quite a thing, but the literary gentlemen these days don't seem to make much fuss over them, do they? I wonder why. Nowadays you hardly even see things like fireflies and crows." "That's true. I wonder why." Daisuke, playing it straight, was equally solemn. "It's probably because they have been overwhelmed by the electric lights. They have begun to retreat," said Kadono with a aha, as the finishing touch to his own joke. He went back to his room. Daisuke followed to the entranceway. Kadono looked back. "Would you be going out again?" "Fine. I'll watch out for the lamp. The old woman's been lying down for a while. She said her stomach aches. It's probably nothing serious. Please enjoy yourself." Daisuke went out to the gate. When he got to the Edogawa, the river's water were already dark. Needless to say, he intended to visit Hiraoka. Therefore, he did not follow the bank as usual, but crossed the bridge directly and went up to Kongojizaka. As a matter of fact, Daisuke had recently seen both Hiraoka and Michiyo 2 or 3 times. The first time was after he had received a comparatively long letter from Hiraoka. The letter first expressed thanks for Daisuke's help since Hiraoka's return to Tokyo. This was followed by something to the effect that he had received invaluable assistance from many friends and superiors, but recently, thanks to the good offices of an acquaintance, he had been urged to become the head reporter in the financial section of a certain newspaper. He himself felt that he would like to try it, but since he had also asked Daisuke for his help in this matter shortly after arriving in Tokyo, he did not think it was right to proceed without asking his leave, and he was therefore writing for his advice. Daisuke had done nothing more about Hiraoka's request to recommend him for a position in his brother's firm. He had simply let the matter go, not even refusing. Therefore, he took this letter as Hiraoka's way of pressing him. He decided that it would be much too cold to refuse by mail, so he visited Hiraoka on the following day and carefully explaining the situation in his brother's company, asked him to give up on the idea for the time being. Hiraoka said that he himself had been thinking of something of the sort was probably the case, then turned to Michiyo with an odd look in his eye. On another occasion, he had received a postcard from Hiraoka saying that the newspaper job was final at last. He would like to relax and drink with him some night. Would Daisuke come on such and such date? Daisuke stopped by on a walk to tell him that unfortunately something else had come up and he would not be able to make it. Hiraoka was sprawled out on his back in the middle of his room asleep. He had gone to a gathering the night before and had too much to drink, he said, repeatedly rubbing his red eye. Then he looked at Daisuke and suddenly declared that human beings had to be single, like Daisuke, in order to do any work. He complained loudly about the inconveniences of marriage, claiming that he would go anywhere, Manchuria, America, if only he were single. Michiyo was working stealthily in the next room. The third time, Daisuke had visited while Hiraoka was away at work. That time, he had not gone on any business. He spent about half an hour there, sitting on the veranda talking. Between time and this evening, he had tried to avoid going in the direction of Koishikawa. Daisuke went to the Takehayacho, cut through, and 200 or 300 yards later, came out right in front of a door lamp bearing the name Hiraoka. When he called from outside the grating, the maid came out with the lamp. Both husband and wife were out. Daisuke left immediately without even asking their whereabouts and catching the streetcar, rode to Hongo, changed for Kanda, got off, went to the certain beer hall and gulped down some beer. When he awoke the next morning, he still felt as if rings were unequal red-eye, partitioned his brain into 2 layers. Whenever this happened, Daisuke could not but think that his brain was a piece of patchwork whose inner and outer surfaces were of different material. He would often shake it, trying to mix the two together. Now, with his head against the pillow, he curled his right hand into a fist and hit above his ear 2 or 3 times. Daisuke had never attributed this dysfunction to excessive indulgence in alcohol. Since childhood, he had always been able to hold his liquor. No matter how much he drank, he never departed noticeably from his normal behavior. Moreover, once he had slept soundly, his body showed no signs of impairment. Once he had somehow gotten into a drinking bout with his brother and managed to put down 13 3-cup bottles. The next day he had gone to school, looking just as usual. His brother complained of a headache and looked wretched for 2 days. Seigo had said it was a question of age. Compared to that occasion, the beer that he had drunk the night before was trifling, thought Daisuke as he hit himself on his head. Fortunately, even when his head felt layered like this, his brain continued to function normally. True, he did become reluctant at times to use his head, but he was confident that if he but made the effort was equal to any complex task. Therefore, there were no grounds for worry that changes in his brain tissue might bring about mental disorders. The first time he had experienced this sensation, he was surprised. The second time, he rather welcomed it as a novel experience. These days, this experience most often seemed to accompany a decline in mental vigor. It had become a symptom of those periods when he ventured to persist in substanceless acts. This was the sore point for Daisuke. Sitting up in his bed, he shook his head once more. At breakfast, Kadono had tried to talk to him about the story in the morning paper, recounting the battle of the serpent and the eagle. But he had not responded. Kadono, thinking one of those periods had begun again, left the morning room. He went to the kitchen and said solicitously to the old woman, "It's not good for you to work so hard, auntie. I'll clear off Sensei's tray. So go over there and rest." Daisuke remembered for the first time the old woman's indisposition. He was on the verge of saying something kind, but decided that it was too much trouble and stopped. As soon as he put down his knife, he picked up his teacup and went into the study. It was already past 9 when he looked at the clock. For a while he sat gazing at the garden as he slowly sipped his tea. Then Kadono came in and announced, "Someone from your home has come to fetch you." Daisuke did not recall that anyone was to has been sent for him from home. When he asked about it, Kadono would only mumble something about a rickshaw driver, so Daisuke got up and went to the entranceway, shaking his head all the while. There he found a man named Katsu, who pulled his brother's rickshaw. He pulled the rubber-wheeled vehicle sideways to the door, bowed politely. When he asked, "Katsu, was it about sending you to fetch me?" Katsu answered unapologetically, "The mistress said I was to take the rickshaw and bring you back." "Is it something urgent?" Katsu, of course, knew nothing. He simply said, "She said that you would understand when you got there," and would not finish his sentence. Daisuke went back into the house. He was about to call the old woman and have her get out a change of clothing, but not wanting to use her when she had a stomach ache, he scurried through the drawer himself and dressed hurriedly, and then stepped into Katsu's rickshaw. Sorry. Sorry. There was a strong wind blowing that day. Katsu's movements were labored as he bowed forward and ran. Inside, Daisuke was so windblown that the two layers of his brain spun around and around. But it was pleasant to feel his numbed self, still in a state of half-sleep, be lifted into space by the wheels that spun beautifully, open, without sound or echo. By the time he arrived in Aoyama, he felt considerably more refreshed than when he got up. Wondering if something had happened, he popped his head into the houseboy's room on his way in. There he found Naoki, the houseboy, and Seitaro sitting alone eating strawberries sprinkled with white sugar. When he said, "Well, that looks good," Naoki righted himself immediately and greeted him. Seitaro, his lips still wet, suddenly asked, "When are you going to get married, uncle?" Naoki grinned. Daisuke felt a little trapped, so he said to Seitaro half teasingly and half scoldingly, "Why aren't you in school today, eating strawberries at this hour of the day?" "But it's Sunday today," answered Seitaro seriously. "Oh, so it is." Daisuke showed surprise. Naoki looked at Daisuke's face and in the end burst out laughing. Daisuke also laughed and went out to the drawing room. There was no one there. A round carved sandalwood tray lay on the freshly changed floor mats. On it, was a teacup with a design by Asai Mokugo of Kyoto baked into it. From the garden of the morning green stemmed into the wide empty room and made everything look still. It seemed that the wind outside had suddenly died down. As he crossed the drawing room and walked towards his brother's room, he saw someone's shadow. "Oh, that's too much," he heard his sister-in-law said. Daisuke stepped into the room. Inside stood his brother and sister-in-law and Nuiko. His brother stood facing in his direction, wearing a man's stiff obi with a gold chain wrapped around and a cloak of a peculiar silk currently in fashion. Seeing Daisuke, Seigo said to Umeko, "See, there he is. So have him take you." Daisuke, of course, had no idea what he meant. Then Umeko turned to him and said, "Dai-san, you are of course free today." "Well, yes, I'm free," answered Daisuke. "Then please go to the Kabukiza with me." As he listened to his sister-in-law's word, a certain sense of comedy rose swiftly in Daisuke's head, but today he lacked the daring to tease her as usual. To avoid any complications, he put on a casual expression and said good-humoredly, "Fine, let's go." Then Umeko asked back, "But you said you have already seen it once." "Once, twice, it makes no difference. Let's go." Daisuke smiled at Umeko. "You really are dissolute, aren't you?" observed Umeko. Daisuke felt the comedy mount. Saying that he had business to attend to, his brother went out. Apparently, he had promised to come around to the theater about 4 o'clock after he had finished his work. It would seem that Umeko and Nuiko could very well have watched by themselves until then, but Umeko had said that she did not want to go. Seigo had said that in that case, she should take Naoki, but Naoki had sat stiffly in his navy blue printed kimono and hakama and announced that he would not go. So they had sent for Daisuke as a last resort. This was the explanation Seigo gave on his way out. Daisuke thought it did not make such sense, but he only said, "Is that so?" He concluded that his sister-in-law had gone to the trouble of sending for him because she wanted someone to talk to between acts and to run errands. Umeko and Nuiko spent a great deal of their time on the toilet. Daisuke stood by, a patient director of the preparation. From time to time, he made light-hearted fun of them, drawing 2 or 3 protests from Nuiko that Uncle Daisuke was too unkind. Daisuke's father had gone out early that morning and was not home. His sister-in-law said that she did not know where he had gone. Daisuke did not particularly want to know. He was only grateful that he was out. Since their last interview, she had not crossed his father's path more than twice, and then only for 10 or 15 minutes. When the conversation showed signs of becoming involved, he had bowed politely and left. As a result, his father had come into the living room and complained that lately, Daisuke could never seem to sit down. No sooner did he see his father's face than he was preparing his escape. This was what Umeko had to say as she stood before the mirror, patting the back of her summer obi. "I really have lost credit, haven't I?" said Daisuke with his sister-in-law's and Nuiko's parasol in hand. He stepped out ahead of them to the entranceway. There, 3 rickshaws were lined up. Fearing the wind, Daisuke had worn the hunting cap. But the wind had died at last, and from between the clouds the sun beat down upon their heads. Umeko and Nuiko, who went ahead, put up their parasols. From time to time, Daisuke had shaded his eyes from the back of his hand. At the theater, Umeko and Nuiko were both attentive viewers, but Daisuke, partly because it was his second time and partly because the state of his mind these past 3 or 4 days failed to be totally distracted by the stage. He was relentlessly aware of the oppressive heat that weighed heavily in his spirit, and he frequently picked up his fan to send air from his collar to his head. Between the acts, Nuiko would turn to Daisuke and ask him strange questions. Questions that, in fact, were usually unanswerable. Why was the man drinking sake from a washtub? Or how could a priest become a general? Umeko laughed every time she heard Nuiko. Daisuke suddenly remembered a review that he had seen in the paper 2 or 3 days ago by a certain literary figure. According to the article, Japanese plays are so abounded in fantastic plots that they were difficult for the audience to follow. When he read this, Daisuke had thought that if he were an actor, he would not care to have people that like that come to see him. He said to Kadono that to scold the actor for what the playwright had done was as foolish as wanting to hear Kojiro's Joruri recitation in order to know Chikamatsu's work. Kadono, as usual, had said, "Oh, is that right?" Daisuke, who had been accustomed to watching traditional Japanese theater from childhood, was like Umeko, a pure and simple appreciator of the art form. For him, the meaning of the art performed on the stage was to be construed narrowly as applying only to the actor's skills. Therefore, he and Umeko got along famously. They exchanged glances from time to time, adding commentary that sounded quite professional, and they were mutually impressed. But in general, Daisuke had already begun to lose interest in the stage, even while the curtains were up. He would look this way and that through his opera glasses. Far in the corner of his field of vision, there were many geishas. Some of them had turned their own glasses towards him. To Daisuke's right hand was a man of about the same age who had brought along his beautiful wife. Her hair was done up in the married woman style. Looking at his wife's profile, Daisuke thought that she bore a strong resemblance to a certain geisha of his acquaintance. To his left was a male party of 4. They were all academics, and Daisuke remembered each of their faces. Next to them, 2 people who had taken over the wide area just for themselves. One of them seemed to be about his brother's age and was dressed correctly in the suit. He wore gold-rimmed glasses, and whenever he wanted to say something, he had a habit of sticking his chin out and turning it slightly upward. When he saw this man, Daisuke thought that he somehow looked familiar. But in the end, he did not even try to recall who it was. His companion was a young woman. Daisuke decided that she was not yet 20. She had come without a cloak, and she let her pompadour hair hang forward more than most. Much of the time she sat with her chin pressed against her collar. Out of discomfort, Daisuke got up a number of times and went to the rear corridor, where he looked out upon the narrow sky. He was quite ready to hand over Nuiko and his sister-in-laws as soon as his brother arrived, and to leave early for himself. Once he took Nuiko with him and walked all around to stretch his legs. In the end, he even thought of sending for a little sake. His brother came just at dusk. When Daisuke told him that he was terribly late, his brother pulled a gold watch from his obi and showed it to Daisuke. It turned out to be only a little after 6. As usual, his brother sat calmly, looking all around, but when the time came to eat, he went out to the corridor and did not return for a long time. After a while, Daisuke happened to look over and found him talking to the stall of the man with the gold-rimmed glasses. From time to time, he seemed to address a few words to the young woman as well, but the woman would only show a slight smile and then turn earnestly to the stage. Daisuke thought of asking his sister-in-law the man's name, but his brother was a man whose social circle were so wide, who in fact looked upon society as his own home, that wherever people were gathered, he easily made way into any group, as he was doing now. Thus, Daisuke did not give it a second thought and remained silent. Towards Then, towards the end of the act, his brother came to their entrance and called to Daisuke to come for just a minute. He took him over to the man with the gold rimmed glasses and introduced him as his younger brother. Then he told Daisuke that this was Mr. Takagi of Kobe. The gold rimmed gentleman looked back at the young woman and said that this was his niece. The woman bowed gracefully. Daisuke's brother added that she was Mr. Sagawa's daughter. When he heard the woman's name, Daisuke realized how neatly he had been trapped. But he pretended to know nothing and chatted about this and that. His sister-in-law turned towards him for an instant. After 5 or 6 minutes, Daisuke returned to his seat with his brother. Until Sagawa's daughter had been presented to him, he had planned to escape as soon as his brother appeared, but he could not get away with that anymore. He sensed that if he were to appear too selfish now, it would backfire later. So he sat on, enduring discomfort. His brother did not seem to have any interest in the program either, but he sat poised in his usual easygoing manner, puffing heavily on his cigar. If he had made any comments at all, they were on the level. "Isn't that a pretty scene, Nuiko?" Unlike her usual curious self, Umeko did not ask a single question or offer any observations on Takagi or Sagawa's daughter. Her prim manner struck Daisuke as comical. In the past, he had from time to time been trapped by his sister-in-law's stratagem, but never once had he gotten angry. If he were his usual self, he might even have laughed off today's farce as a welcome diversion from his boredom. That was not all. If he had any intentions of marrying, he might have turned this farce to an advantage and used his ingenuity to create a comedy with a happy ending. He would have been content for the rest of his life laughing at himself, but now, when he thought that even his sister-in-law was colluding with his father and brother to lure him into a pitfall, he could not stand back and watch it as a comic act. As he wondered how his sister-in-law intended to develop this incident further, Daisuke became a trifle anxious. Of all his family, it was Umeko who most enjoyed such intrigues. Somewhere in Daisuke's mind lurked the fear that if she pressed in on him on the marriage issue, then the closer she pressed, the further she would have to remove himself from his family. It was nearly 11 o'clock when the performance ended. When they stepped outside, they found that the wind had completely died, but there was neither moon nor stars, and only a few lamps shed lights on the quiet night. Since the hour was late, there was hardly any time to linger and chat in the tea house. They were meant to meet the other three, but Daisuke had carelessly neglected to order a rickshaw for himself. Thinking it would have been troublesome, he pushed aside his sister-in-law's invitation and took a streetcar from in front of the tea house. As he waited to change in the middle of the dark road in Sukiyabashi, a woman carrying a child on her back moved warily towards him. 2 or 3 trains passed on the other side. Between Daisuke and the tracks, there was a high bank-like mound of piled dirt or rock. Daisuke realized for the first time that he was standing on the wrong place. "If you are waiting to catch the streetcar, you can't get it here. It's on the other side," he called to the woman as he began walking. The woman thanked him and followed from behind. Daisuke walked uncertainly in the dark, almost as if he were groping. When he had gone some 30 yards to the left, guided by the border of the moat, he finally found the pole marking the stop. There, the woman got in the train going towards Kandabashi. Daisuke alone got on the Akasaka train on the opposite side. In the train, Daisuke felt sleepy yet unable to sleep. Even as he was tossed about, he anticipated the trouble he would have falling asleep that night. Although he was often exhausted and overcome with listlessness towards everything offered by daylight, some unknown excitement would beset him and prevent him from passing a quiet night as he would have liked. In his mind, the colors that have left their mark by turning during the day flickered all at once and without regard for chronology or shape. And he could not tell exactly what colors or what activities they were. With his eyes shut, he resolved that when he got home he would again seek the aid of whiskey. This disorderly, brilliant flow of colors inevitably brought in its wake a reflection. The reflection of Michio. And there Daisuke felt as if he had come upon a haven, but this haven would not project itself clearly on his eyes. He perceived it only with the rhythm of his heart. It amounted to no more than a discovery that Michio's face, her manner, her words, her relationship with her husband, her illness, in short, her entire situation constituted an entity exactly suited to his liking. The next day, Daisuke received a long letter from a friend in Tajima. This friend had returned to his home province right after graduation and had not been back to Tokyo since. Of course, he had not intended to live in the middle of the mountains, but parental orders had confined him to his hometown. Still, for about 1 year he had continued to write, to the point of becoming a nuisance, that he would prevail over his father yet and return to Tokyo. Lately he seemed to have resigned himself at last, and sent no more fretful complaints. His family was an old one in the area, and the principal business apparently consisted of cutting trees in the ancestral forest. In this latest letter, he described in detail his daily life. Then he jokingly announced in deadly serious language that he had been elected a mayor a month ago, and had retained the status of receiving an annual salary of 300 yen. A middle school teacher straight from the university would earn at least 3 times as much, he wrote, comparing himself to some of their friends. About 1 year after his return home, this friend had married the daughter of a wealthy man from the outskirts of Kyoto. Needless to say, this was in accordance with parental instructions. Soon afterward, a child was born. He never wrote a word about his wife after the wedding, but he did seem to take an interest in the child's development, and from time to time sent reports that made Daisuke smile. Every time he read one of them, Daisuke imagined the life of this friend, who was deriving satisfaction from his own child. He wondered to what extent his feelings for his wife had changed since the wedding because of this child. From time to time, the friend sent him dried freshwater trout or dried persimmons. In return, Daisuke had usually sent recently published works of Western literature. In the friend's response, there was sure to be some comment indicating that he had read books with interest, but this had not lasted for long. In the end, his friend had not even acknowledged the arrival of the books. When Daisuke finally inquired about them, his friend wrote that he had indeed gratefully received the books. He had thought to send his thanks after reading them, but time had somehow slipped past away. In fact, he still had not read them. To tell the truth, it was not so much that he did not have the time, but that he did not feel like reading them. To put it even more bluntly, he could no longer understand them even if he read them. After that, Daisuke decided not to send any more books, but to buy toys instead. As he put the letter back into the envelope, Daisuke felt keenly the fact that this old friend, with whom he had once shared the same inclinations, was now playing a different tune, governed by thoughts and actions that were nearly precise opposite of those of the past. And he carefully compared the two sets of notes that sounded from the vibrations of chord of life. As a theorizer, Daisuke accepted his friend's marriage. He understood that it was a principle of nature that a man living in the mountains with only trees and valleys for companions would want to ensure his security by taking a wife chosen by his parents. By the same reasoning, he concluded that for city dwellers, all marriage was bound to bring misfortune. This was because the city was nothing more than a showcase of human beings. To arrive at this conclusion from his premise, Daisuke had traced the following course. He held that spiritual beauty and physical beauty were two distinct categories, and that it was the right of urbanites to expose themselves to every kind of beauty. He concluded that anyone who did not avail himself of this opportunity, thus transferring his affections from A to B, then moving on from B to C, was an insensitive brute who did not properly appreciate life. He believed that, on the strength of his own experience, this was irrefutable fact. From this, he arrived at the conclusion that all men and women who lived in the city were subject to unpredictable changes according to circumstances in their attractions for each other. As a corollary, it followed that parties to a marriage threatened by what was popularly called infidelity were perpetually subject to misfortunes begotten in the past. Daisuke chose the geisha as the outstanding urbanites because of their heightened sensibilities and broad-ranging freedom of contact. Who knew how often in the course of a lifetime some among them would change lovers? Were not all urbanite geisha, only to a lesser degree? Anyone who sang the praises of undying love in this day and age belonged to the first rank of hypocrites in Daisuke's estimate. When he had carried these thoughts so far, Michio's form suddenly drifted into his head. Then he wondered if he had not omitted some factor from his calculations. By try as he would, he could not discover what it might be. In that case, according to his own reasoning, the sentiments he had held Michio were no more than a passing fancy. His mind duly recognized this, but his heart did not have the courage to accept it as a certainty. That was chapter 11. Daisuke. You are in denial, Daisuke-san. Aish. 1 minute break. Be right back. back after the short break. Okay. Man. Yeah, I'm only gonna read one more chapter, I think. It's very long. I don't want to like overdo things and then I get super burnt out and then I start to like stutter, which I already did stutter a little bit just now. So okay, come, hydrate. Anyway, okay, let's go. We are currently reading Natsume Sōseki. Natsume Sōseki, それから, and then それから. We're currently reading Natsume Sōseki, それから, Chapter 12. Chapter 12. それから by Natsume Sōseki. Daisuke feared his sister-in-law's pressures. He also feared Michio's magnetic powers. It was still too early for summering. He lost interest in every form of diversion. Even when he read, he could no longer recognize his own form in the black print. If he tried to settle down and think calmly, thoughts would come to him as the threat of a spool. But once he put them together, they were all such as to be fearful to a man. In order to stir up his pale brain, as one would a milkshake, Daisuke decided that he should travel for a while. At first, he planned to go to his father's villa, but insofar as he would be vulnerable to attack from Tokyo, it would not be very different from staying in Ushigome. Daisuke brought a travel guide and began to research where he should go. He felt as if no ideal place existed on the face of the earth. Still, he tried to force himself to go somewhere. He decided that this did not call for an extensive preparation. Daisuke got on a streetcar and arrived in Ginza. It was an afternoon when a cheerful wind blew over the streets. Daisuke walked around all the bazaar in Shimbashi, then strode down the wide avenue towards Kyobashi. The houses on the other side looked flat, as if they were part of a stage backdrop. The blue sky was painted right above the roofs. Daisuke stopped at 2 or 3 haberdashers, equipping himself with a few necessities. Among them was a comparatively expensive bottle of perfume. But he tried to buy toothpaste at Shiseido. A young clerk kept pressing a homemade product on him in spite of his protest. Daisuke finally left the store frowning. Carrying the paper packages under his arms, he walked to the periphery of Ginza, and from there went around to Daikongashi, where he crossed the Kajibashi bridge in the direction of Marunouchi. As he walked aimlessly westward, he ended up thinking that even this could be called a simple trip. He became tired and looked for a rickshaw, but none was to be found, and he finally had to take the streetcar home. When he got back, he found shoes that looked like Seitaro's neatly arranged in the entranceway. He asked Kadono about it, and Kadono answered yes, that was right. Seitaro had been waiting for some time. Daisuke went immediately to the study. Seitaro had settled himself in Daisuke's big chair and was reading an account of Alaskan explorations. Some buckwheat cakes and tea tray had been placed side by side on the western table. "What's this, Seitaro? Coming over when I'm out and feasting yourself, eh?" Seitaro laughed and stuffed the Alaskan exploration in his pocket, then left the seat. "If you want to stay there, go ahead." But Seitaro would not listen. As usual, Daisuke began teasing him. Seitaro knew the number of times Daisuke had yawned at the Kabukiza the other day, and he posed the same question as before. "When are you going to get married, uncle?" Seitaro had come on an errand for his father. The message was for him to come by 11 o'clock on the following morning. Daisuke found it annoying to be at his father's and brother's beck and call. He turned to Seitaro and said half angrily, "What is this? It's terrible, just calling a person over without telling him what it's about." Seitaro continued to grin. Daisuke shifted the conversation in another direction. The principal topic was the results of previous day's sumo matches listed in the newspaper. Daisuke urged Seitaro to stay for the dinner, but he declined, asking he had to prepare for school, and went home. Before he left, he asked, "Then you're not coming tomorrow, uncle?" Pressed for an answer, Daisuke said, "I don't know. Would you tell them at home that your uncle might be going on a trip?" When Seitaro asked, "When?" Daisuke answered, "Today or tomorrow." Seitaro accepted this and went to the entranceway, but as he stopped to put on his shoes, he looked up at Daisuke and asked, "Where are you going, uncle?" "Where? How would I know? I'll just go somewhere." Seitaro grinned and stepped out. Daisuke intended to set out that very night and had Kadono bring out his Gladstone bag. He stuffed it with a few personal things. Kadono, who had been eyeing the bag with more than a little curiosity, said still standing, "Shall I help with anything?" "No, this is nothing," he declined, and pulling out the bottle of perfume he had already packed away, he tore off the wrappings, removed the stopper, and put it to his nose. Kadono stalked back to his own room. In 2 or 3 minutes, he came back with, "Should I be ordering the rickshaw then, sensei?" Daisuke put the Gladstone bag before him and looked up. "Well, why don't you wait for a while?" When he looked at the garden, he saw the daylight had hovered faintly over the Chinese hawthorn hedge. As he peered out, Daisuke thought that in 30 minutes he would have chosen a destination. He intended to take the first train that left at a convenient hour, get off wherever it took him, and make that place his home until the following day. There, he would wait for a new fate to sweep him off. His travel funds were, of course, inadequate. If he were to stay at places suited to his style, they would last no more than a week. But Daisuke was unmindful of such details. If worst come to worst, he would send home for money. Besides, since his original purpose was to get a change of air, he was determined not to place the emphasis on luxury. If the mood seized him, he was even prepared to hire a baggage carrier and walk all day. He opened the travel guide again and again to pore laboriously over the fine print, but before he could come any closer to a decision, his mind slipped off to Michio. It occurred to him that he might see how she was once more before leaving Tokyo. He decided that he could take care of packing the bag that night. As long as the plans could be carried out the next day, it would be all right. He hurried out to the entrance. Hearing his footsteps, Kadono came dashing out. Daisuke, still in his ordinary clothes, was taking his hat from the hook. "Are you going out again? Is it shopping? I'll be glad to do it if I can," said Kadono, surprised. Daisuke simply declared, "The trip's off for tonight," and went out. It was already dark. The stars seemed to add their light one by one to the beautiful sky. A pleasant wind blew at his sleeve, but Daisuke, who had strode swiftly on his long legs, had not gone 200 or 300 yards before he felt sweat at his brow. He took off his hat and let the night dew fall on his black head, from time to time swinging his hat as he walked. When he came to Hiraoka's neighborhood, dark human shadows flitted about softly like bats. Lamplight filtered through the crack in the shabby wooden wall onto the street. Michio was reading a newspaper by the light. Asked if she always read the paper at that hour, she answered that it was her second time. You have that much time on your hands. Daisuke moved his cushion to the threshold and with his body half hanging over the veranda, leaned against the shoji. Hiraoka was absent. Michio said that she had just come home from the bath and had a fan beside her. With a slight tinge of color in her usually pale cheeks, she said that he should be back soon, so wouldn't Daisuke stay, and went to the morning room to prepare tea. Her hair was done in a Western style. Hiraoka did not come home soon as Michio had said. Asked if he was always this late, she smiled and said that it was about like this. Daisuke detected a hint of sadness in her smile and redirected his intent gaze on her face. Michio suddenly picked up the fan and began fanning at her sleeve. Daisuke was concerned about Hiraoka's finances. He tried asking straightforwardly. They must no longer be troubled for living expenses these days. Michio said, well, and smiled as she had before. Since Daisuke did not respond immediately, she asked in turn, does it look that way to you? Then she tossed the fan aside and spread her beautiful, slender, freshly baked fingers to show Daisuke. The fingers wore neither the ring Daisuke had given her nor the other ring. Daisuke, who had always kept the image of his keepsake in his heart, understood her meaning. As she withdrew her hands, Michio's face became flushed. It can't be helped, so please forgive me, she said. Daisuke felt mournful. That night, Daisuke left Hiraoka's house about 9 o'clock. Before he left, he took what was in his wallet and handed it to Michio. That had taken some quick calculating on his part. First, he had casually opened the wallet in the folds of his kimono and without even counting the bills inside, thrusted them carelessly in front of Michio with the words that he was giving them to her and she was to use them. Michio said in a low voice, as if from concern over the maid, "Oh no, you mustn't," and put both hands against her body, but Daisuke would not withdraw his hand. "If you could accept the ring, then you can accept this. It amounts to the same thing. Think of it as a paper ring and take it." Daisuke said these words with a smile, but Michio still hesitated, saying that it was too much. Daisuke asked if Hiraoka would scold if he found out. Michio did not know if he would scold or approve, so she continued to hesitate. Daisuke advised that if there was a chance that he would scold, then she should say nothing to him. Still, Michio would not put out her hand. Daisuke, of course, could not withdraw what he had extended. Finally, he had no choice but to lean over slightly and reach his palm towards Michio's bosom. At the same time, he brought his face within a foot of hers and said in a low, firm tone, "It's all right. Go ahead, take it." Michio drew back, almost burying her chin into her collar, and without a word, put out her right hand. The bills fell into it. At that moment, Michio beat her long lashes together 2 or 3 times, then she slipped into her obi what her hand had caught. "I'll come again. Give my regards to Hiraoka," said Daisuke, and went outside. When he had crossed the block and entered a small lane, it had turned quite dark. He cut through the dark night feeling as if he had seen a beautiful dream. In less than 30 minutes, he arrived at his own gate, but he did not feel like going in. Crowned by the stars high above, he wandered through the quiet residential neighborhood. He felt that he would not tire even if he walked like this till early morning. Eventually, he came back to his own gate. All was quiet inside. Kadono and the old woman seemed to have been gossiping in the morning room. "It's quite late, Sensei. What train would you be taking tomorrow?" The question came as soon as he was in the entranceway. Smiling, Daisuke answered, "It's off for tomorrow too," and went into his room. His bed had already been laid out. Daisuke took the perfume that he had opened earlier and put one drop on his stuffed pillow. Not satisfied with that, he went to the four corners of the room, bottle in his hand, and sprinkled 1 or 2 drops in each spot. Having thus indulged himself, he changed into a white cotton kimono and peacefully reclined his limbs beneath a light new comforter. He fell into a rose-scented sleep. When he awoke, the sun had climbed high and was sending golden vibration into the veranda. At his pillow were 2 neatly folded newspapers. Daisuke had no idea when Kadono had opened the shutters or brought in the newspapers. With one long stretch, he sat up. While he was scrubbing in the bath, Kadono came in, looking somewhat disconcerted. "Your brother has come from Aoyama." Daisuke answered to the effect that he would be with him shortly, and dried himself with care. The living room would scarcely have been cleaned, but Daisuke saw no point of his running out. So he took his time, parted his hair, and shaved as usual before sauntering into the morning room. Once there, however, he could not bring himself to linger over the breakfast table. He sipped a cup of tea on his feet, wrapped a towel over his moustache, flung it away, and went into the parlor, where he greeted his brother. As usual, his brother had between his fingers a dark cigar that had gone out. He was calmly reading one of Daisuke's newspapers. As soon as he saw Daisuke's face, he asked, "It smells awfully good in this room. Is it your head?" "It was like this before my head come in, wasn't it?" he answered, and told him about last night's perfume. "You're getting pretty stylish, aren't you?" his brother said calmly. Seigo seldom came to Daisuke's. On the rare occasion when he did, it was always because some business had brought him. As soon as that was settled, he left. Daisuke was sure that something had come up today too. He imagined that it was because he had sent Seitaro away with careless excuses the night before. After 5 or 6 minutes of small talk, his brother finally came out and said, "Last night Seitaro came home and said that you were going on a trip today. That's why I came over." "Yes, I was planning to leave around 6 this morning." Daisuke delivered what amounted to a lie with perfect composure. His brother, also looking serious, said, If you were the sort who could get up early enough to leave at 6, I wouldn't have come running all the way over from Aoyama to at this hour." As Daisuke had anticipated, Seigo's business turned out to be nothing more than a part of the campaign now launched against him. That is to say, plans had made to invite Takagi and Sagawa's daughter to a luncheon that day, and it was their father's order that Daisuke attend. From what his brother had to say, their father had been mightily displeased when he heard Seitaro's story last night. A worried Umeko had said that she would go and see Daisuke before he left and made him postpone his trip. Seigo, however, had restrained her by saying, "You don't think that fellow would set out tonight? He's probably sitting in front of his bag right now thinking, wait until tomorrow. He's sure to come over even if we leave him alone." That's how I reassured her. Seigo was as calm as ever. Daisuke became a little provoked and said, "Then why didn't you leave me alone and wait and see?" Women are such impatient creatures. The minute she got up this morning, she started nagging me, saying that we were responsible to father. Seigo did not look amused. In fact, he was staring somewhat resentfully at Daisuke. Daisuke would not say definitely whether or not he would go, but he did not have the courage to send his brother off with the same vague excuses that he had used on Seitaro. Besides, even if he were to refuse to attend the luncheon and set out on a trip instead, he could no longer count on his own purse. He was now in a corner from which he could not stir without appealing to his brother or sister-in-law or even his father. In short, one of the opposition. So, he launched into non-committal appraisal of Takagi and Sagawa's daughter. He had only seen Takagi once before, about 10 years ago, and strangely enough, he somehow seemed familiar, and when he spotted him at the Kabukiza the other day, he had tried to think who it was. On the other hand, he had only recently held a photograph of Sagawa's daughter in his hands, and even with the actual person before him, he had made no connection. Photographs were curious things. If one knew the person and then saw a photograph, it was easy to tell who it was. But the opposite, to guess the person from a photograph, was quite difficult. To put it philosophically, it came down to the impossibility of producing life from death, although for life to turn into death and was only a natural progression. That's what I thought, said Daisuke. His brother agreed, but did not seem particularly impressed. He carelessly shifted his cigar in his mouth, and it had grown so short that it was on the verge of lighting his mustache. Then he asked, "Why, you don't necessarily have to go on a trip today, do you?" Daisuke had no choice but to answer that he did not. "Then you can come and eat with us today, can't you?" Again, Daisuke could not help assenting. "In that case, I have to stop by a few places now, so you be sure to come, all right?" He seemed to be in as much of a hurry as ever. Now that he had resigned himself, Daisuke felt that he did not care what happened and so answered his brother would have wanted. "How about it anyway? Don't you feel like marrying that girl? It wouldn't hurt to take her. It's funny. If you're going to put so much weight on a wife that you have to go around picking and choosing, you will look like one of those Genroku dandies. I thought everybody in those days, both women and men, had terribly uncomfortable affairs. Isn't that true?" "Well, however that may be, try not to make the old man angry, all right?" With these words, Seigo left. Daisuke went back into his room and chewed on his brother's warning. He was forced to admit that, in fact, he and his brother shared the same views on marriage. Therefore, Seigo, who would urge marriage upon him, should in fact leave him alone. Daisuke thus came to the opposite conclusion from his brother, a conclusion suited to his own convenience. According to his brother, Sagawa's daughter had been brought by her uncle on a rare visit to Tokyo, combining business with sightseeing. Once the uncle's business was settled, she would be taken home again. Whether his father was taking advantage of his occasion to cement their interest permanently, or whether during the recent trip he had taken the initiative to create this opportunity, seemed immaterial to Daisuke. As long as he sat at the same table with those people and ate his food as if he enjoyed it, he would have fulfilled his social obligations. He decided that if further steps became necessary, he would have to look for a solution then. That was the only course open to him. Daisuke called the old woman and had her get out his clothes. Although it was bothersome, out of respect he put on a cloak with the family crest. Since he did not have an unlined hakama, he decided to get into one of his father's or brother's when he got home. For all his sensitivity, Daisuke did not particularly mind social functions because he was accustomed to them from childhood. If there was a banquet, reception, or a farewell party, he usually arranged his schedule so that he could attend. He was therefore familiar with quite a number of the faces well known in certain circles. Some among them were aristocrats, on the order of counts and viscounts. Daisuke did not feel that he derived either gain or loss from associating with such people. His speech and manner were the same regardless of where he went. Superficially, he resembled his brother quite closely in his respect. As a result, those who knew them but slightly believed the brothers to be similar in temperament as well. It was 5 minutes to 11 when Daisuke arrived at Aoyama. The guests had not arrived. His brother was not home either. Only his sister-in-law was sitting in the living room, fully prepared. As soon as he saw Daisuke, she attacked. "You're outrageous! Trying to outwit me. You're outrageous, trying to outwit me like that and go off on a trip." On certain occasions, Umeko was incapable of being illogical. In this instance, he seemed completely oblivious of the fact that it was she who had outwitted Daisuke. Daisuke found it charming. So he sat down and immediately began to appraise her appearance. He learned that his father was in his room, but he refused to go back. Pressed to do so, he said, "When the guest arrives, I'll announce it to him." "I can pay my respects then, won't that do?" As usual, he gave free rein to his tongue, but he could not utter a single word on Sagawa's daughter, though Umeko struggled her utmost to bring conversation to this subject. This was only too apparent to Daisuke. It made him play the innocent all the more and take his revenge on her. Presently, the awaited guest arrived, and just as he had promised, Daisuke went to inform his father. Sure enough, his father only said, "All right," and immediately got up. He had no time to scold. Daisuke went back to put on his hakama and then proceeded to the parlor. Host and guests were all facing one another. His father and Takagi opened the conversation. Umeko concentrated on Sagawa's daughter. Soon his brother ambled in, still wearing what he had worn earlier this morning. He turned to his guest and said, Excuse me for being late," and then took his seat and turned to Daisuke and said in a low voice, "They're early, aren't they?" The room next to the parlor had been prepared as the dining room. Through the crack in the door, Daisuke caught a glimpse of the corner of conspicuously white tablecloth and understood that the meal would be Western style. Umeko left her seat for a moment and locked in the door. This was to signal their father that the luncheon preparations were completed. "Please come this way." The father stood up. Takagi bowed and also stood. Sagawa's daughter followed her uncle's example and stood. Daisuke discovered then that the woman's body was comparatively long and slender from hip down. At the table, his father and Takagi sat face to face in the center. Umeko sat at Takagi's right and the daughter took her place at the father's left. Just as the women now sat facing each other, so Seigo and Daisuke sat opposite each other. It worked out that Daisuke could look at the young lady's face from a slight angle over the crude stand. He thought that the flesh and color of her cheeks, which caught the sun's vigorous rays from the window behind, cast too dark a shadow on the edge of her nose. On the other hand, the area bordering her ear were clearly a light pink. Her conspicuously small ears looked delicate enough to admit the light. In contrast to her skin, her large eyes were dark brown black. The young lady's face, whose chief merit consisted of colorfulness of this contrast, was on the whole rather round. Given the number of people present, the table was not on the large side. Compared to the size of the room, it was even too small, but with freshly cut flowers to frame the snowy white cloth, the knives and forks stood out nicely. Conversation at the table generally consisted of ordinary small talk. At first, even that failed to provoke much interest. In such situation, Daisuke's father normally introduced his favorite topics of paintings, books, and antiques. And if the mood seized him, he would bring out any number of them from storage and arrange them before his guests. Thanks to him, Daisuke had acquired some discrimination in these matters. His brother likewise knew at least the name of a few artists. However, this meant no more than his standing in front of a scroll and saying, "Oh, this is Kyoe, isn't it?" Or, "Oh, this is an Okyo, isn't it?" Since he never changed his expression at all, he did not seem in the least interested. Neither Seigo or nor Daisuke ever brandished magnifying glass in an effort to ascertain the authenticity of a work, nor, whatever the painting in question, did they ever apply the sort of criticism their father was wont to pronounce. The old masters never painted waves like that. Those waves contradicted the teaching. To add life to the withering conversation, their father eventually tried touching upon his favorite areas. But after 2 or 3 words, it became apparent that Takagi was totally indifferent to those subjects. Veteran that he was, Daisuke's father immediately retreated. But once the conversation returned to the territory that was safe for both, neither felt any interest in it. Finally, Daisuke's father asked Takagi what his hobbies are. Takagi answered to the effect that he had no hobbies in particular. The old man, apparently deciding that all was lost, handed Takagi over to his sons and for some time remained outside the circle of conversation. Seigo effortlessly cultivated topics ranging from an inn in Kobe to Nanko Jinja Shrine. Anything that came to mind, really. And he also created a natural opening for Sagawa's daughter. The daughter would punctuate the conversation with the necessary words, then retreat immediately. Daisuke and Takagi first took up Doshisha University, then turned to the state of American universities. In the end, in the names of Emerson and Hawthorne came up. But Daisuke merely ascertained that Takagi possessed knowledge of this sort and did not pursue the matter any further. The literary conversation thus came to an end after the names of 2 or 3 authors and works had been raised and failed to develop at all. Umeko, of course, had been chattering ceaselessly from the start. The principal object of her efforts was naturally to break through the reserve and silence of the young lady seated before her. Out of politeness, if nothing else, the latter could not but respond to Umeko's uninterrupted flow of questions. But there was hardly any trace of her having taken the initiative to win Umeko's heart. Whenever she spoke, she had a habit of crooking her neck slightly. This, however, failed to strike Daisuke as coquettish. The young lady had been educated in Kyoto. In music, she had begun the lessons on the koto, but had later changed to piano. She had practiced the violin as well, but because the fingering was difficult, she might as well not have touched the instrument. She seldom went to the theater. When Umeko asked, "What did you think of the kabuki the other day?" Sagawa's daughter did not answer. Daisuke took this less a sign of not understanding drama than an expression of contempt for it. Still, Umeko persisted with the topic and said that the actor A was such and such, whereby actor B was thus and so. Daisuke saw that his sister-in-law was again overstepping the bounds of good judgment and had no choice but to cut in from the side. "Even if you don't care for the theater, you must read novels," thus putting an end to the theater talk. For the first time, the young lady looked straight at Daisuke for an instant. Her answer was unexpectedly distinct. "No, not even novels." At this, the company, who had all been awaiting her answer, expectantly burst out laughing. Takagi took it upon himself to explain for his niece. Under the influence of Miss So-and-so, who had been in charge of the young lady's education, she had in some respect been trained almost as a Puritan. Accordingly, she was very much behind the times, he added, offering his own view of the matter. Naturally, no one laughed this time. Daisuke's father, who was not very favorably disposed towards Christianity, praised, "That's very fine." Umeko failed to see any merit in such an education. Still, she said, "Yes, that's true." An ambiguous observation hardly in keeping with her nature. Seigo, not wanting Umeko's words to weigh unduly heavy upon the other party, immediately changed the subject. "Then your English must be quite good." The young lady smiled and said, "No." The meal being over, guest and host returned to the drawing room and began talking. But the flame of conversation would not light on onto the new subjects as from one candle to the other. Umeko stood and opened the piano and looked back at the young lady. "Won't you give us a piece?" she asked. The young lady, of course, did not stir. Then Dai-san, why don't you start us off?" Daisuke knew that he was not skilled enough to play before others, but if he were to make such excuses, matters would only become complicated, so he simply said, "Why don't you leave it open? I'll get to it later," and continued to talk about unrelated subjects. The guests left in another hour. The four went out together to the entranceway. On his way back, the old man said, "Daisuke isn't leaving yet, is he?" Daisuke, one step behind the others, stretched so that he could nearly touch the lintel with his both hands. Then he wandered around the deserted drawing room and dining room for a short while, and returning to the living room to find his brother and sister-in-law sitting face to face discussing something. "Hey, you can't go home yet. Father says that he wants to see you. Go on to the back," said his father in an exaggerated, serious tone. Umeko betrayed a faint smile. Daisuke scratched his head in silence. He did not have the courage to enter his father's room alone. He tried every possible means to drag his brother and sister-in-law along. When his efforts met with failure, he simply sat down on the spot. Then a chambermaid came in to say, "If the young master would please come to the back for a moment." I'll be there right away," Daisuke answered and proceeded to advance the following argument to his brother and sister-in-law. Given the father's disposition and his own indiscreet character, he might as well end up angering the old man if he were to go by himself. Should that happen, his brother and sister-in-law would have to step in and mediate. That would be far more troublesome for them in the end, so they might as well go now, rather than try to spare themselves a little effort. Seigo, who disliked arguments, wore an expression that all but said, "How stupid." "Then let's go," he said, and got up. Umeko also got up laughing. The three crossed the corridor to their father's room and seated themselves innocently. Umeko adroitly maneuvered the conversation so that their father's scolding would not touch upon Daisuke's past history. She directed the flow of conversation as much as possible towards an evaluation of the guest who had just left. She praised Sagawa's daughter as a very quiet, nice girl. Their father and Seigo and Daisuke all expressed agreement to this, but his brother raised the question that if she was indeed educated by an American miss, then shouldn't she be a little more direct in the Western manner? Daisuke thought that the question was a valid one. His father and sister-in-law were silent. Then Daisuke offered the explanation that her quietness came from shyness, and therefore was quite separate from the Mrs. training. It probably had to do with the standard of male-female social intercourse in Japan. His father thought that was quite true. Umeko guessed that the place of this young lady's education, Kyoto, might have something to do with it as well. His brother said that even in Tokyo, not all women were like Umeko. At this, their father tapped his ash receptacle and adopted an expression of severe neutrality. Then Umeko said that her looks were far better than average too. Neither their father nor Seigo had any objection to this. Daisuke also admitted his agreement. The four then moved on to the assessment of Takagi. This was easily settled with the view that he had a good, stable character. Unfortunately, no one knew the young lady's parents, but their father gave his words that they were modest, trustworthy people. He had had a member of the House of Peers from the same prefecture check into their background. Lastly, they launched into the topic of the Sagawa family fortunes. Their father said that people like them were more stable than ordinary businessmen because they rested on the solid foundation. With the young lady's eligibility thus largely established, his father turned to Daisuke and asked, "You can't have any serious objections?" Neither his tone nor words would be taken to mean, "Well, what do you think of it?" "Well, no." Daisuke was still inconclusive. His father was watching Daisuke intently, but his wrinkled brow clouded increasingly. Then his brother, feeling pressed to say something, said, "Well, why don't you think it over carefully?" and created a little breathing space for Daisuke. And that is chapter 12. Guys, we did it! And yes, that's all I'm going to read for today. I know I should read more, but I'm really trying not to burn out myself too much. It's a pretty good hour and 40 minutes reading session. It's not too bad, guys. Right? An hour and a half. Yeah, I would do better next time. I'll try my best. But 2 chapters is good enough for now. Anyways, short stream. Thank you so much for dropping by, everyone who dropped by, and I'll see you guys next time. Chapter 11 and 12 done. We'll see you chapter 13 onwards. Okay? Bye. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.